at the end of the 50s, a new streak of humour, new vein of humour appeared in England. And it was crazy, it was silly, it was anarchic, and it became enormously popular. It led to a show called The Goons, which featured Peter Sellers, Spike Milligan, Harry Seacombe, and originally Michael Bentine. And it was a radio show. And Peter Sellers in those days was a radio star. He started as a stooge to Ted Ray in Raise a Laugh, and he still wasn't a film star. And that's when I first met him. And I started making records with him at that time, because I loved what they were all doing. And Dick Lester also was interested in this kind of humour, and he teamed up with them to make a very, very crazy film indeed. And that was a kind of prototype of A Hard Day's Night. When the Beatles first came into Abbey Road Studios, I was a little bit sceptical about what the outcome would be. But I liked their personalities, and they were quite respectful and they were a bit nervous because they were worried how I was going to receive them. I was I was a boss figure, obviously, and I was obviously a kind of headmaster figure, if you like, to them. And they were a little bit twitchy. And I did a take with them, but I was trying to sort out who was going to be, frankly, who was going to be the lead singer, because I was still thinking in terms of Cliff and the Shadows. I was still wondering how I was going to handle this group of four. And I said, come into the control room and have a listen to what we've been doing. And as they came in, I said, look, listen to it. Tell me if there's anything you don't like. And George Harrison bravely came up and said, I don't like your tie for a start. And, and of course, the others fell around and laughed at it, but they pummeled him, and they thought he was going to blow it, you know, because I'd be offended. Of course, I thought it was remarkably cheeky and very funny too. It wasn't a bad tie, actually. The amount of time I got with the Beatles was minimal, because by this time they were on their golden treadmill, and that meant that they were appearing all over the world, rushing from hotel room to hotel room for various performances, various shows, slotted in between television shows, radio shows, interviews with the press. Their life was merciless, actually. And I was begging Brian, I said, look, if you want records out, you've got to give me time with them. And I was allocated maybe an afternoon or a day here and an evening or whatever there. So I didn't get very much time with them. When I did, I concentrated on stockpiling material for the next album or whatever it was. And this was the case before A Hard Day's Night began. And Dick Lester came to me and said, what have you got that I can have in the film? And I had already quite a few titles. And now, once the film started, John and Paul wrote some special songs for the film as well. If I Fell was one of them, for example. There were several, I think 4 or 5. But they just blossomed from being, in my opinion, not very interesting musical people to begin with, into suddenly geniuses. And they worked very hard, and they worked very well under pressure. Very young men, don't forget, they're in their early 20s. Paul was 21 perhaps. And all the immense challenges that were presented to them resulted in great stuff. And they worked very quickly, and we had to work quickly to capture them. So the songs were written with a minimum of fuss, and John and Paul were kind of tending to go their own ways, tended to write their own songs at this time, but they still helped each other out. And I would be recording just like a live broadcast. We weren't doing multi-track work. We weren't overdubbing voices incessantly. The very first album I did was, in fact, like a radio show. And I had them in the studios from morning till night and recorded a whole album in one day. But so that this was the tradition which they faced when they came to write and record the music for A Hard Day's Night. They knew we wanted them quickly, and they were expected. The media do tend to pigeonhole people, and certainly in the case of A Hard Day's Night, I'm afraid we did get the various characters in the Beatles stereotyped. which was a little bit, I mean, it still goes on to this day, that Paul was the softie and John was the rocker. And that wasn't true, you know, because you think of Paul writing Helter Skelter. You can imagine a more rocky song than that. And John with this soft stuff like Julia and Imagine and so on.
I'd like more drums there.
No, I think it's on that.
It
the
sounds
other bit,
like a
on the other
cover,
bit, where you got
right
on the
cover.
third bit. You know, on the
Third bit, the
Okay.
more bang.
I guess I was feeling pretty smug. Basically because most people think that I signed the Beatles for their music. I didn't. I signed the Beatles, you know, in January '62 I first saw Brian and I said, I don't think much of what you're offering me. And in fact, if this is it, I'll turn you down. I said, but I will give you the chance of bringing them down to London and I will take them through the motions in the studio. And he did that. And when I came down to London, I listened to them, I played around with our sounds, met them, and I thought they were terrific. Not as musicians, but as people. They had this wonderful charisma, and that's what made me sign them. It was their personalities that made me sign them. And the one guy who didn't come over too well was the guy who on drums, because he was very quiet and almost sullen. And I'm afraid we got rid of him. But the other three were fantastic, and when Ringo was added to them, they became even better. And I think they had that feeling. You know when you meet someone and you warm to them, and you like being with them, and they give you a kind of glow, and when they leave you, you feel a little bit lost because they've left you. The Beatles had that effect on me, and I thought, well, if they have that effect on me, they're going to be a success because they'll have that effect on people. And of course the Beatles on the film were able to give that impression also. They were able to project that part of their charisma to the audience, which is why the film was a success.